So, welcome everyone. Once again, we're looking to have a little conversation today. This time, we're going to have a conversation about John chapter 20. As you can see, we're almost done here. So, what I'd like to do today with John chapter 20 is actually begin at the conclusion of this particular chapter. This chapter concludes, I think, all of what John has done now from John chapter 1 all the way up through John 20. He writes this because he wants everyone to believe that Jesus is who he says he is, and that a person may have life in his name. So it's important for us to see this conclusion in light of what John, I think, has tried to do with this entire gospel. He wants us to believe. In particular, I think here he wants us to believe that the resurrection is absolutely true. So as we look at this, it seems to me John is trying to quell some of the rumors that have probably swirled around this whole thing. Not the least of which is the one that says the disciples came and took away the body. With John's witnesses, I think John is essentially saying, no, we didn't do that. Here's what really happened. And John is going to tell us, or at least perhaps there's a reminiscent here, of a rumor that has been started by the Jewish leaders and the soldiers at the tomb. Because after it happened, the Jewish leaders got these soldiers together, paid them some money, and said, look, just tell them the disciples came and took away the body. Now, Matthew tells us that story in Matthew chapter 28. I suspect that rumor has been bandied about quite a bit since that time. And John here, he simply wants to say, no, that's not exactly what happened. In fact, what he's going to say is the first disciples who went there, they thought that's what happened. Mary's the first one who comes, and she thinks immediately somebody has taken the body away. She doesn't assume the disciples did. She goes back and tells Peter and John. Peter and John come running. They look inside, and they see that the grave clothes are still there. Not the least of which is this little detail that one of the pieces of grave clothes, the one that was wrapped around his head, has been folded up neatly and is laying in there. It's unlikely that somebody stealing the body quickly and trying to get away from soldiers who were sleeping would have taken the time to do that. And so I think John gives us that particular detail to say, I saw it, I was there. We didn't take the body. Later on, as the story unfolds in John is going to tell us that first of all, Mary sees Jesus. She talks to him. He tells Mary to go and tell the disciples. And when she gets there, at some time later, after she tells him that she saw Jesus, Jesus appears to them, or at least 11 of them. Thomas is not there. I should say 10 because Judas is not there yet. Thomas isn't there either. But the disciples see it. Jesus appears to them just inside a locked room without having come in the door. Sounds almost like some sort of fantasy picture, but the fact is, if in fact Jesus died and then came back to life, that sounds like a fantasy picture too, doesn't it? And yet the disciples say, that's exactly what happened. That's what makes this story so amazing. And maybe what's more amazing about it is what John has been leading up to at this point, starting with John chapter 1, where he says, this Jesus who came to us, he was there at creation. And now he's here again. He died, like every human being has to die. And yet he conquered death. The one thing that all of us are afraid of. So if you were the one early on reading this or hearing this testimony, you might have said, well, I'm not sure I believe it. That's what Thomas did. Thomas, one of the disciples who lived with him for the entire time of Jesus' ministry, he wasn't sure until he could put his hands in his side and on the nail prints in his hands. He's not asking for anything more than the disciples already had. They had seen him and probably touched him. Thomas sees him finally when he comes back again, and his testimony is pretty remarkable. He says, my Lord and my God. Jesus blesses him because he now believes, but he says, blessed are those who haven't really seen what you guys have seen and still believe. That would be us. Anybody who has come after the disciples. And there's plenty of other witnesses that they could draw on if they really wanted them. Go back and read 1 Corinthians chapter 15. You'll see a whole list of witnesses. Paul will even say at that point, some of whom are still alive. And so John's conclusion Seems very natural at this point. I want you to have faith. I want you to believe in this Jesus. And I want you to believe so that you too can have eternal life. How about you? Does it sound pretty good? Think about John's testimony here and then see for yourself. Talk about it. Think about what you've read here, not only here, but in all this entire gospel. Thank you.